So I don't intend for this channel to become a baby and parenting forum, but I am a parent. I do have a baby. And we felt the need to do at least one more parenting related video about a slightly ticklish topic, pun only slightly intended, namely breastfeeding.
Squeeze, squeeze.
Okay, we got the tackiness out of the way, so now we can have a serious discussion about this subject. It's become kind of a hot button issue in the last couple of years, mostly due to pseudo-ethical concerns regarding breastfeeding in public. But there's something much deeper about the topic of breastfeeding that has really bothered me as a new parent, and I'm sure it's bothering a lot of other new parents out there as well. So strap in, because I'm going on a bit of a rant, and I call it, "You've tried the breast, now try the rest." Okay, so here's what's going on, and it is a little bit personal, so please bear with me. But I feel like this is a struggle that needs to be shared so that other parents out there don't feel quite as alone as we did. So as you may know by now, my wife and I had our first child 9 months ago. I'm the youngest child in my family, she's the youngest child in hers. Neither of us has ever had any exposure to babies, ever in our lives. And on top of that, we both live thousands of miles away from our families. So in many respects, we are out here completely on our own and having to figure out this whole parenting thing completely by ourselves. Thank you for your patience, by the way. I know we've made a lot of stupid mistakes. Well, since day one, my wife has struggled with breastfeeding. We met multiple times with lactation consultants and specialists. We had numerous conversations with our pediatrician and our OBGYN. We had conversations with more experienced parents. We read books. We consulted internet articles and watched instructional videos. Nothing helped. We tried everything. Nursing on demand, nursing on a set schedule, constant nursing, pumping for long periods, pumping for short but intense periods, and hand expressing until she was bruised and sore. She took herbal supplements and even prescription drugs, and the end result was always the same. She is simply not able to produce enough milk. Now, to me, this wasn't such a huge deal. She was able to produce at least a little bit of milk, enough to ensure that he got at least some of the antibodies that his teeny tiny little immune system needed. And for the rest of his diet, we had to rely on formula. But for me, that was okay, because formula is abundant, it's readily available. But to her, this was heartbreaking. And it broke my heart to see her thinking that she had failed as a mother. Well, guess what? She is not a failure. And neither are any of you who are experiencing the same problem. You're mothers. There is a lot more to this job than simply being a pair of udders. Now, I would never tell you to ignore advice from a medical professional or a lactation specialist, but I have noticed that pretty much every expert you talk to will give you completely contradictory information and advice. Some say that you need to feed or pump for only 15 minutes or less, because any milk you get after that isn't as nutritious, and feeding for longer will only irritate the nipples. Others say that you need to feed for at least 30 minutes each time to ensure that your baby is getting the carb-rich foremilk and the fat-rich hind milk, which is what your baby truly needs. Others will say that time isn't a factor at all, you just need to empty the breast each time you feed. Well, we did actually time it, and it took literally 45 to 60 minutes each time to completely get the last few drops out. And even then, we were barely getting 1 or 2 ounces. That's not even enough for a full feed. And since this little guy is hungry like every 2 hours, that means she would be spending literally 12 out of 24 hours just feeding this guy, with no adequate time for rest or eating or relaxation. So that's what one group of consultants told us. And it should come as no surprise that a second group of consultants told us exactly the opposite, and that we only need to feed him until he signals to us that he's full. Now, unfortunately, because her milk supply was low and slow, he would usually fall asleep before getting anywhere near a full feed, or just end up spitting the nipple out in frustration and crying because he was hungry. Eventually, our OBGYN prescribed a drug called Reglan, which is supposed to increase milk production. He gave her a 1-week supply, he told her it should work within the first few days, and that once her milk supply was up, it will stay up. Well, it did slowly increase during that week, but the very first day after the course of pills was over, her milk production dropped by half, then by another half. Within 3 days, it was back to what it was before the Reglan. She asked for a refill and was told that if it doesn't work in the first week, it won't work the second week. Then we were told that the Reglan must not have worked because she didn't spend enough time or effort on breastfeeding while using it, which is a really crappy thing to say to a patient who is obviously struggling. Nevertheless, they did relent and gave us 1 more week's worth of pills. And again, after a few days, her supply increased, but again, only temporarily. And as soon as the pills ran out, so did the milk. Now, I don't care what the doctor, the nurses, and the pharmacist have to say. Prescription drugs were our last resort, and even those didn't work. What else were we supposed to do? And now we get to the part that is really infuriating to me. There are tons of websites out there, like from reputable health organizations, that have all kinds of information about why you might not be producing sufficient breast milk. The problem is they are all extremely condescending and accusatory, sometimes downright hostile. They all jump to the same conclusion, namely that if you're not producing milk, then you've obviously done something wrong, or you just didn't try hard enough, and now it's too late and you failed. Game over. So what kind of bullshit is that? For one thing, most of these experts seem to agree that if you don't give your infant enough time on the breast during the first few days after birth, then you have already severely stunted your milk supply for life. Or if for some reason you have to take a day or 2 off from breastfeeding, say because you're traveling or because you're sick or whatever, well, too late. Your milk supply has already dwindled and you will never get it back. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have this research that shows that women can restart breastfeeding at any point in their lives, even years after their last pregnancy. There are cases of grandmothers breastfeeding their own grandchildren when necessary, and it only takes a few days of actively trying to breastfeed to re-establish your milk supply. So which is it? You can't have it both ways. And I acknowledge that breastfeeding is the ideal form of nutrition for a baby. It's the system that nature designed, and not just for humans, but for all mammals. Milk contains all of the nutrients that a baby needs, plus the antibodies that will help protect them until their own immune system gets strong enough to carry them through. But that notion of breast is best has become almost cult-like. It's shoved down the throat of every new mother, usually well before delivery, but the lack of actual support is staggering. And yeah, there are plenty of lactation specialists out there. Our hospital even had a free breastfeeding clinic and support center where people who are struggling with breastfeeding can go, and they'll give you some very helpful advice and pointers on why you may be having some difficulty. But even after following all of their advice and listening to all of their information, if you are still having trouble breastfeeding and you say out loud that you want to start using formula, that is where their support and their sympathy just ends. Because apparently there is just no way that any woman can fail to produce milk if they follow those oh so easy instructions. So the implication is either that you can't handle simple instructions, you don't care enough about your baby, or there is just something wrong with you. Frankly, that's pretty sick. That's just really kicking a vulnerable person when they're down. We actually had people tell us that using formula is a last resort option. They even tried to convince us that no one really uses it, or if they do, it's only as an emergency or as a supplement to their normal diet, because breastfeeding is the only safe, natural, and normal way to feed your child. Always has been, always will be.
Wrong answer.
He's right. It's actually kind of bullshit. Here's a little historical perspective. Since ancient history, people have figured out that human babies need human milk to survive. Raw cow's milk, goat's milk, sheep's milk, even wolf's milk just doesn't cut it. But even in ancient historical records, there are references to wet nursing and cross nursing. It's mentioned in the Bible, it's mentioned in ancient Greek and Roman sources, and in pretty much every era of every culture in the world since then. There have always been mothers who, for whatever reason, have been unable to produce milk. In Jessica's case, the why is still a bit of a mystery. There's no easily diagnosable reason for why a perfectly healthy new mother should not be producing breast milk, but it's not that uncommon. It's certainly not unheard of. Do you know what is unheard of? For the rest of society to just abandon that mother and let her child starve to death. And that's why there have always been wet nurses. Now it's true, wet nurses became more prevalent among the upper classes because anything to do with birth and child raising, and women's health in general, began to carry a stigma around it in Western civilization. But just because some women who were perfectly able to breastfeed chose not to, does not mean that every woman who used a wet nurse did so as a luxury. For many women, it was a necessity, literally the only way to keep their child from dying of starvation. So infant formula came along in the late 1800s, and the quality has continued to improve ever since. And today, it's an $8 billion industry. Go to any supermarket or baby store and you'll see entire aisles devoted to nothing but formula. Shelf after shelf, dozens of options. Some brands even claim to have the same antibodies found in breast milk, although I'm sure it's probably not as simple as that. My point is though, if no one is using formula, as every lactation consultant we talk to has claimed, then who the hell is buying it? Why are Similac and Enfamil making so damn much of it, and spending so much on R&D and marketing on a product that, apparently, no one uses? Why do stores devote so much prime real estate to a product that, apparently, no one wants? I suspect that this is just a symptom of the pendulum swinging first one way and then the other. I'm sure that when commercially produced formula became readily available, it was a huge boon to mothers, and fathers for that matter, who maybe had jobs and couldn't be on 24-hour nursing duty, or who had other children and couldn't spend literally half their time nursing their newborn when they had to care for their other children as well, or mothers with twins or triplets who either couldn't produce enough milk for multiple children or who just didn't have enough hours in the day. But I am also sure that formula became a simple convenience for some mothers who could have breastfed more but chose to rely on formula more and more because it's much more convenient and also a lot easier on the body. I'm also sure that studies were done that showed that, surprise surprise, formula-fed babies maybe didn't thrive quite as well as breastfed babies did. And, as a typical knee-jerk overreaction to this information, as is so common, the public began to assume that formula was therefore bad, and it inevitably followed that anyone who uses it must be lazy, or selfish, or just plain stupid. I suppose that pediatricians and the like were just trying to be cautious, and they were trying to ensure that parents weren't using formula unnecessarily or carelessly. But instead of simply urging them to use it responsibly and only as necessary, they just decided to warn parents away from using it completely and shame them into exclusively breastfeeding their kids, whether they were physically able to or not. There is some research out there that indicates that babies who are exclusively formula fed sometimes have a few health issues that breastfed babies don't. Mostly in the form of an increased risk of gastric troubles, colds, rashes, ear infections, basically anything that their immune system could have used a little extra help fighting off. Now that may all sound pretty scary, but notice that I said an increased risk, because it's not like breastfed babies never get sick. It's just that their immune system gets a stronger boost from breast milk that it doesn't get from formula. Now there is also a possible risk of things like bacterial infection from improperly sanitized utensils, and a very minute possibility of tainted formula. But if you're not producing enough breast milk, formula is good. Formula is your friend. Lactation specialists seem to take a almost perverse pleasure in frightening people away from using formula, as if starving to death on non-existent breast milk is somehow better. Now, I shouldn't need to stress this so strongly, but your baby needs to eat, and formula is as safe as it can be. At his 6-month checkup, our formula-fed son was in the 95th percentile in all growth and size categories, and had the motor and verbal skills of a 9-month-old. Now he actually is 9 months old, and he's only gotten bigger since then. And he's crawling, he's standing, he's even walking and talking a little bit. So yeah, I'd say he's doing pretty great. So here's what I'm getting at, and what I really wanted to say to all of you mothers out there who are having trouble breastfeeding. First, you should go see a lactation specialist, and yes, you should try to follow all of their advice. You should also talk to your pediatrician and your OBGYN, just in case they have any extra advice that might help. But the most important point I have to make is, if you have followed all of their advice and it's just not happening, you are not a failure. You are not defective. And you are not alone. F those articles that dismiss your efforts. F those experts that tell you that you didn't try hard enough. And especially, f anyone who tells you that you don't care enough about your child. So that's what I wanted to say about breastfeeding and infant formula, which I feel is an important and underrepresented viewpoint. And if you don't believe me, the proof is in this chubby little pudding right here, because he is perfectly healthy and frankly, perfectly adorable. Now this video was a little more serious than my usual nerd stuff. I did try to break up the monotony with a few little jokes, and of course I had the best co-host in the business filming with me today. So go ahead and toss us a like, share this video, or subscribe if you just want to see more of my awesome baby and listen to more of my nonsense. We'll see you next time. You looking at yourself? You're just trying to shut me up. Ugh. Front stair. Monster baby. Say bye-bye. If you're gonna throw those, throw them this side so I can get them. What did I just say? Has become almost cult-like. Cult. Why is that so hard to say? I don't know. It's hard. Can you say it? And yeah, there are plenty of lactation specialists out there. Our hospital even had a free breastfeeding clinic and support center where people who are having trouble with breastfeeding can go. Oh, is that for me?